evening, everybody. Sorry about that. Welcome to the Art Deco Society's UK's November webinar with our speaker, Lucinda Gosling. We're very happy to have so many of you joining us for what promises to be a fascinating talk this evening. I'm Ruthie Good. I'm the events coordinator for the Art Deco Society UK. Before introducing Lucy, I'll go over the usual house rules, which I'm sure you're very familiar with by now, but just to let you know, auto-generated captions are available if you click on CC Live transcription at the bottom of your screen and then show subtitles. Next, I need to remind you that this is the Zoom webinar format, which is different from a regular Zoom meeting, which means you'll only be able to see and hear me and Lucy, our speaker. We can't see or hear you, so feel free to relax throughout the talk without worrying about what you look like or whether any sounds your end are going to be broadcast, because that won't happen. As usual, we'll follow up this evening's presentation with a Q&A session with Lucy, our speaker, at the end. If you'd like to ask a question or even just make a comment, just type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen at any point during the evening. And I'll put all your questions to Lucy at the end. We had lots of brilliant questions following last month's talk, so please don't hesitate to type in any question. Or you might want to use the chat function to share any thoughts with the group, in which case, please feel free to type in the same box, and I can read that out too at the end. Please be respectful with your questions and comments. If you have any issues with sound or video, you can also use the chat function to raise this. And we have our lovely chair of Art Deco Society UK, Lucy, behind the scenes, and she'll be able to help out with any technical glitches. So now I've gone over all our house rules. I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker for this evening, Lucinda Gosling. Lucy is a writer, curator and speaker with a special interest in society and visual culture of the early 20th century. She's the author of at least 15 books on an eclectic range of subjects, from feminist art to First World War knitting. Her book, John Hassell, The Life and Art of the Poster King, was longlisted for the William M.B. Berger British Art Writing Prize. And her 2019 book, Holidays and High Society, touches on the Roadhouse phenomenon of the interwar years, something she's going to explore this evening for us. So Lucy is going to be delving into the fascinating history of the Roadhouse in Britain and considering its relatively brief success and then its rapid decline. She'll be sharing images with us which reflect the fashions worn and the entertainment enjoyed by habitués of the Roadhouse, and promises to throw in a little bit of salacious gossip as well. So I'm definitely looking forward to that part. So Lucy, please make sure your camera's on now, and everybody else sit back and enjoy the evening. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, Ruthie. I can't see everybody there, but I hope you can see me and particularly can hear me, but thank you for joining. I think Ruthie has told you most of what's needed to be known about me, but just for a little bit of extra information, I work at Mary Evans Picture Library, a long-established source for historical images, and we have a great archive of prints and periodicals and postcards, and it's particularly magazines which first inspired my interest in roadhouses, and I felt it was an area of history which I thought hadn't been explored very much. It actually has by a couple of academics who I will be mentioning in the course of my talk. Anyway, look, without further ado, let's go to our first slide, which isn't working. There we are. There it is. Yeah, that's working. Rise and fall of the Roadhouse. So I guess the best place to start is to ask, what is a roadhouse? I mean, they certainly came in many shapes and forms, but to give a very broad description, we are looking at destinations reached by car, which provided a range of entertainment and other facilities. They tended to be on trunk roads, arterial roads, and in the early days, particularly those heading out of London. And they would provide all sorts of things from dining, ballrooms and dance floors, dance bands, of course, but also swimming pools, sunbathing areas, pleasant gardens, tennis courts, and significantly, parking for the cars which would get you there. So because they're situated out of town, the car is very much an integral part of the roadhouse. They're the sort of definition of the roadhouse in a nutshell. It's a place of pleasure reached by car. So I want to demonstrate in this talk that the roadhouse came in many forms, and that the phenomenon, and Ruthie had trouble with that word, so do I, its origins are rooted in a number of factors. So let's talk about those different ingredients that form the recipe for the roadhouse which emerged in the interwar period. And the first thing, of course, is quite obvious, is the rise in car ownership in Britain. I've given, I don't want to bore people with loads of statistics, but I did want to share just this. You can see the incredible growth of cars among people between 1920 and 1930, rising from 650,000 in Britain to, almost 2.3 million. So that's a really significant rise. There's a huge interest in cars generally. They are a status symbol, not only of your own social mobility, but of your literal mobility, in the fact that you are able to get to places and enjoy, sort of activities which a car facilitates, basically. So the pictures I'm sharing here on the right, that is actually an advert from Bolton and Paul of Norwich, who are well known for all sorts of outdoor buildings, greenhouses, etc. But that is for a garage, and it's from 1919. So I think it's very interesting that already at that point they are advertising about ways to house your precious car. And on the left, that image is by C.E. Turner in the Illustrated London News, and it appeared on the front cover in 1926, entitled "The Universality of Car Ownership." So it was just really trying to demonstrate the really rapid rise in cars among the British people at the time, of all types. You can obviously, they came in quite. There's a little Austin on the left, and I'm not quite sure what the one on the right is. But anyway, look, that's just showing that people are really recognising this at the time. And the illustrated magazines in our archive, they are certainly awash with really brilliant car advertisements at the time. And these car advertisements are very much, as they are today, trying to aim for as a well-heeled audience, because they're the people who can afford them, and to, I suppose, convey an idea that motoring is stylish, exclusive. It appeals to women, often showing some very elegantly dressed women alongside cars. I'm showing some luxury car brands here, obviously Rolls-Royce and Humbers, but to the right there is the Ford V8, which was much more affordable and very nippy, and was really aimed at people who just wanted to hop in a car and take to the open road. I think what's really interesting is that Lagonda advert from the early 1930s, which is showing a model wearing a dress for Ascot by the couturier Eileen Adair of Grosvenor Street. And that, again, is really kind of allying this idea of car ownership with fashion and style, and, high society and society events. in honour of this talk, I decided to subscribe to the Autocar archive and just to see what they had to say about roadhouses. Unfortunately, they didn't have that much to say about it, but they did have some wonderful covers, and I wanted to share these three, which kind of really convey that idea of taking to the open road and exploring things, finding fashionable leisure destinations to go to. The one on the left is the earliest one, but what's quite interesting is this showing a roadside inn, a very traditional one, but what it's got alongside it are petrol pumps. And that is one way that a number of roadhouses developed, in that they were existing inns, but they started to supply petrol to passing drivers. The one in the middle, I just think, is an absolutely great image and really sort of reflects the age of modernism and speed. I also like that sort of little building in the background there, and we'll see sort of, towards the end of the talk, so a building which looks an awful lot like that actually. And then that one for the Austin on the cover of the Autocar is showing sort of tennis courts. I'm not sure whether that is a smart house with tennis courts, but it could possibly be a country club or a sort of a roadhouse type of place. So anyway, just wanted to sort of share those to get that sort of feeling that this is what people are perceiving motoring as, sort of a leisurely activity in itself. I don't think many of us feel that anymore. The thought of actually driving anywhere out of London fills me with dread, because usually you end up in a jam. So the first sort of notion that perhaps motoring and hospitality could benefit each other is this idea, which appeared in magazines in 1921, and this is the Country Road Club, and the very first branch of that was located at Ham Manor, and it was organised. It was sort of launched by a captain. I'm forgetting his name now. What's he called? I'm trying to focus on this Captain Hopkinson and Mrs. Hopkinson. And the idea of the Country Road Club was motorists would have a stop-off place where they could enjoy some pleasant gardens, perhaps have refreshments. And the idea of the Country Road Club was that it would, every 50 miles along main roads, it would have another stop. Now, I haven't been able to find out any more about this, so I think it kind of, fizzled into non-existence, but it's quite interesting. It's a real forerunner of the roadhouses that would follow, albeit a very exclusive kind of roadhouse. The other thing that's happening around this time when people are beginning to own cars is changes in nightlife and in socializing. So in the Edwardian era, people started to go out more. Smart hotels in London and other cities had restaurants with dance floors and house orchestras. And this is the first time where, upper class people, wealthy elite are beginning to socialize outside of each other's homes. So this idea eventually, as the First World War is coming up, begins to blossom into nightclubs. And I think we often think of nightclubs as a 1920s phenomenon, but actually they began just before and certainly proliferated during the First World War period. So this picture on the left shows Murray's Club, which began in Beak Street in 1913 and had the absolutely fantastic byline, which was to forget your worries and come to Murray's. And it was started by a Canadian called Jack May. And this was a number of supper clubs where people could go and they could dance, dine and drink out of hours. I mean, there were licensing laws, obviously, which did curb drinking, so drinking often had to stop. But actually, if it was a supper club, it meant that you could drink with a meal. And if you were a member, then that was okay. So this kind of opened a whole kind of different type of nightlife, particularly in London, in the capital. And it was also driven by music and a change in music. And just before the First World War, ragtime comes over from America. You've got people like Irving Berlin and Scott Joplin. And then during the First World War, the American soldiers who are coming into France are bringing with them the sounds of jazz. So all these all these elements are forming together, and hundreds of nightclubs are beginning to open up around London. The picture bottom right there just shows, see, First World War officers at a supper club dancing, and the one top right is a bit later. It's by an artist called Annie Fish, who used to illustrate the gossip column of Tatler, and that's showing the Café de Paris in London in the 1920s. Obviously, Café de Paris very famously obliterated during the Blitz, but also once it was rebuilt, Noel Coward performed there, a real kind of iconic venue. And so with nightclubs come things like cocktails and fashions for dancing and theatre, which, began to reflect all these changes. There's André Charlet's Wunderbar musical, review, and there you are. The program cover actually shows an elegant couple at a cocktail bar. Then you've got this actress, Madge Mavis, who is in Frederick Lonsdale's 1925 play Spring Cleaning. It's the first play to mention cocktails, for it to be part of, cocktails are becoming part of theatrical and popular culture. There's another illustration by Annie Fish there of a couple at a nightclub. And then there's the front cover of the Tatler, from 1919, actually showing couples dancing. So it's a very new, carefree atmosphere that helps the Roadhouse, which I'll explain more about, develop. Another thing that's happening is a really increased interest in the great outdoors, in health and fitness, and kind of the body beautiful. So things like rambling, camping, caravanning, also bottom left shows Prunella Stack and her Women's League of Health and Beauty, who are always giving demonstrations of exercises in their skimpy uniform. And out of this also comes a real interest in sunbathing as well, which first became fashionable on the French Riviera and other European resorts, and then eventually, British people want to become suntanned for the first time ever. So there's several images there which reflect that, including some sunburn cream, as people used to call it. But the origins of the Roadhouse, ironically, kind of are, I suppose, couched in the river rather than the road. In the late 19th century, river clubs began to spring up along the River Thames to the west of London. And there were several reasons for this. Rowing was becoming a hugely popular and very social sport. And men who did rowing wanted to invite their wives and their mothers and their sisters and daughters along. And so what happened is clubs were established along the River Thames where people could do exactly that. And obviously things like the Henley Regatta and Ascot Sunday were major points in the social calendar. And this picture on the left shows Phyllis Court, which still exists today. And Phyllis Court was had a prime position and a viewing gallery for the Henley Regatta, and it was just a very, very smart place to meet, to see and be seen. And the idea of the Thames was, there was a very sort of romantic, aspirational view of the Thames. I'm just showing a page from the Bystander from 1910, which is just showing, some famous celebrities' houses. But what's really interesting on the right is this cartoon by Annie Fish, and it's from 1917, and it's talking about how Eve, the Tatler's gossip columnist, and her husband had decided to take a summer house on the River Thames. And Eve apparently suspects that Reggie wants to take this house because the next door neighbour is Flossie Highkick of the Gaiety, and there she is. And actually, this is quite true. Loads of actors and actresses had riverside homes with gardens which went down to the river. And if you wished, if you were that sort of person, enjoyed a bit of celebrity spotting during that period, you could get a motorboat which would take you on a sort of celebrity tour of back gardens, so you could see if you could spot Gabby DeLise or somebody like that. So this area of the Thames west of London is a really fashionable destination. Here's a few more examples. The great music hall artist Vesta Tilley there had a house which, as you can see, literally did back onto the river. And there's another very famous stage beauty of the day, Mrs. Brown Potter, at her pretty house at Maidenhead. Maidenhead, Marlow, Bray, but particularly Maidenhead is the centre of a lot of this kind of action. Fred Carno, the great music hall artist who had his own touring company, he actually went so far as he loved the Thames so much, he set up his own club called the Casino, and there's a postcard of that. And he also had this huge houseboat at Tags Island. So the Casino was at East Moseley, and there he is, him and his wife on their very luxurious houseboat, which incidentally, some of you may know this, is now owned by Dave Gilmour of Pink Floyd. I think he does some of his recording on there. And probably like the oldest and most established place in Maidenhead was Skindle's Hotel. Skindle's Hotel sort of first opened in the 1830s as the Orkney Hotel, but then it became Skindle's, and it attracted all sorts, including Edward VII. Obviously, he was a great socialite himself. He would go and enjoy a lamb cutlet, a glass of port, whatever. Skindle's actually, as the years went by, had a bit of a reputation as somewhere to take girls, but nevertheless, it was, a smart place. It's a really traditional place. And the reason you're thinking, why are you talking about rivers when, we're talking about roadhouses? But bear with me, because these places all had to kind of adapt to the trend for roadhouses as the years went on. So a couple of slides which show how this area attracted famous people. This is the Fishery in Maidenhead. I haven't been able to find out much about that, but it was, quite an exclusive club. And there at the Fishery are the Milford Havens, Lord and Lady Milford Haven, who was Lord Mountbatten's elder brother, George and Nada, with their daughter Tatiana, Nada's brother, Michael de Torby, and also George's mother, who was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. And that little boy in the middle is Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. And there he is at the Fishery in the 1920s, probably. It's probably about 1930, that image, if I remember rightly. And here's a few others. So I mentioned Murray's nightclub in Beak Street in London. And what happened is quite a lot of central London clubs began to open summer outposts in Maidenhead or in the area. So in 1915, Murray's opened its River Club. And this is this picture in the middle shows beauties of stage and screen congregating there. These are very sort of picturesque area with the lawns going down to the river. You could sit out and do that. You would have music, you'd have dance floors outside sometimes. Bottom left picture is the notorious Lady Edina Gordon, who was part of the White Mischief set. And there she is with a group at Murray's as well in 1923. Top left is Nada, Lady Milford Haven again, and she's hidden by a hat there, but that's Gloria Vanderbilt. And they're there having a lovely time at the Hind's Head at Bray, which of course is still there and is one of Heston Blumenthal's sort of pub restaurants. And on the right, that's Gordon Selfridge, and he's at the Hungaria restaurant in Maidenhead with Jenny Dolly, one half of the glamorous Dolly sisters. He was very keen on Jenny Dolly, and Jenny held a party at the Hungaria. So as you can see, these places are they're very exclusive, very fashionable, real magnet for celebrities, famous figures. And car magazines are really picking up on this idea as well. So this cover of the Autocar doesn't say where it is, but to me this appears that this car is arriving at an out of town club where people are dancing outdoors. And there's sort of that wonderful lure of the river, but you need a car to get there. So the road and the river kind of combine, and people want to try and sort of find pleasure in these places. So this is all part of the Roadhouse story. I just found these few sort of covers from the Motor magazine, which I thought were interesting. They were only low res on the internet, so I couldn't actually read the text. If anybody else can read it, that would be great. But I thought the middle one did look like a very modern car going past a very modern roadhouse, but I may be wrong. However, the one on the left, Whitsun number, you know, what you want to do on a lovely May bank holiday is get out on the open road in your car. But what's really interesting is this image on the right, which shows an old-fashioned Christmas at a modern motoring hotel. People are beginning to leave the city. I mean, obviously they're still going to clubs in the city, but it's definitely becoming a thing to motor out of London 10, 15, 20 miles and visit somewhere and have the same kind of level of luxurious club nightlife experience you'll get in the West End. And I think these two adverts really do sum this up. Dunlop, obviously one of the best print advertisers in the interwar years, with fabulous illustrated advertisements. And look at that, you've got cars rolling up at a very, very modern looking roadhouse. And the reason I know it's a roadhouse is because you've got people sitting outside at seats and there is a pool there. And a pool is a really key part of any roadhouse offering. So there's somebody diving into the pool, which is floodlit. You know, this idea of being able to swim at night was also very novel, really exciting. And the Ford V8 there also appears to be arriving at something which looks a little bit like a modern Art Deco roadhouse. And then there are guidebooks which are published, all of which are dedicated to listing the stop-off points for enthusiastic motorers. Signal, which is, I wonder if I can move myself, hold on, because I can't see half my pictures. Yes, I can. I'm just going to move myself down there. There we are. Signpost, a confidential motor guide to British Inns by W.G. McMinnies. I think this was first published in about 1934 or 1935. And then there's the Wayside book by Gilbert Rumbold. Very annoyingly, both these books are mine. I found the Wayside book. I don't know what I've done with Signpost, but fortunately I had scanned the cover some years ago, so I'm able to show you it. But they list some really traditional inns and pubs around the country, but they also are very, enthusiastic about the new roadhouses which are emerging. So in 1933, in July, in Maidenhead, a new fabulous entertainment venue opens up, and it's called the Showboat. And it is absolutely state of the art. It is designed in the modern style by D.C. Wadwa and Eric Norman Bailey, who I'm sure lots of you are aware was responsible for a number of Art Deco picture palaces. And you can see that it's very streamlined, very clean, inspired by the ocean liner, and to the point where actually you could swim in the pool and then there would be a companionway up to the sunbathing deck, and you can kind of see, you can just make out some umbrellas on the top deck there. So the Showboat is a real showcase, I suppose, for the Roadhouse, and the fact it's in Maidenhead is very typical, because Maidenhead is such a fashionable destination. And the Wayside book, which I've just shown you, Gilbert Rumbold in there, brilliantly named Gilbert Rumbold, has something to say about it. He says, the newer Showboat, an establishment which displays a most artistic neon message to the night, is an example of modern architecture which pleases and satisfies. At the Showboat, one swims, dines, dances or drinks cocktails or coffee, or tries all five, and the illumination of the swimming pool at night is a sight to thrill. So I suppose that Dunlop ad, which I just showed you, could almost be inspired by a place very much like the Showboat. And the Showboat went all out on its advertising as well. It took a full page ad in the Bystander, which is great because there aren't many really good photographs of it, but that advert sort of gives a really good impression of what it looked like at the time. And the Bystander also, I should say, the Bystander is a magazine really kind of devoted to pastimes like sports, motoring, travel, and it regularly during the early 1930s would publish articles about places out of town which you could visit, usually illustrated by these really fabulous cartoons. And so a little bit more about Murray's, which opened in 1915 and was still going in the 1920s. And it had this absolutely magical illuminated dance floor, just so you could dance under the trees, under the fairy lit trees, and have quite a magical experience doing that. And then there's the Hotel de Paris, again, another riverside outpost of a central London nightclub. And the Hotel de Paris at Bray just sounded absolutely exquisite. Again, you could dance under the stars, and there's all, every kind of luxury that you might want was there. The advert on the left is really interesting because it's actually, you might think it's an advert for the Hotel de Paris, but it isn't actually. It's for Godfrey Davis, which was an exclusive car hire company. And during the 1930s, Godfrey Davis ran a number of adverts which talked, they were sort of advertorials really, talked about different destinations in that kind of Thameside location, and about how glamorous it would be just to get a Buick and and surge off to the Hotel de Paris. So it's again, there's that wonderful synergy between the clubs and the car. And Hotel de Paris may have been a riverside club, but what it quickly had to do was build plenty of garage space for all the motorists who had decided at 11 p.m. at night that they were going to motor out to Bray and sample its delights. But then there are these more typical roadhouses, I suppose, which begin to emerge from the mid-1920s onwards. This is the Clock at Welwyn. Most of them are built on some sort of bypass. With the increase in car ownership, there's a lot of lobbying for road improvements. So that is happening in the 1920s as well. So these new fast roads really inspire entrepreneurs to open up businesses which cater to that. And the Clock is one place which was started by two brothers, Walter and Frederick Waters. And they first of all ran it as a service station, a petrol station, repair shop. And then they opened a cafe and gradually kind of added on more and more, including a ballroom, bungalows at the back where people could stay. And if you look at this picture, I'm not quite sure of the date of this, but from the cars, I would say it's maybe about mid-1920s. And then I found a later postcard which shows just how much it's expanded in that time. For a start, there's ivy sort of crept over the building, but it's probably doubled its footprint on that particular site. The other thing is land at this time by these bypasses is very cheap. So people are able to build on them cheaply. The suburban sprawl, which would eventually swallow up a lot of these roadhouses, hadn't yet really got going. So they've kind of got, a brilliant position for attracting motorists who might want to stop for, whether it's a cup of tea and a scone, or whether it's a big night out. They are there and looking all the time to see what they can offer. And then there are much more historic hotels. This is Great Foster's at Egham. And what Great Foster's did is like beautiful Tudor Elizabethan building. It actually managed to find a Tudor barn and transport it to their site and turn that into a ballroom. So it didn't lose its historical, it didn't sort of spoil any of its Tudor vernacular in doing it, but it still found a way to cater to the motorist. And that's sort of a picture of two bright young things in their swimming costumes feeding the swans at Great Foster's. And I mentioned Phyllis Court earlier, which opened in 1906. Here it is 20 years later, and it's undergone quite a large extension. And this is an illustration by G.H. Davis in the Illustrated London News. He's a fantastic special artist who did loads of kind of infographic, cross-sectional diagrams, which are just brilliant for explaining how things work or what things look like inside. So this is a great kind of cross-section view of Phyllis Court. And what they had done in this sort of new improvements was they had built a nice curved conservatory on the end of the restaurant. They'd introduced a cocktail bar, absolutely essential. And they also, this is quite crucial, they also had a chauffeur's room. Now, quite a few of these clubs, these country clubs, out-of-town clubs and roadhouses, did provide facilities for chauffeurs, because if chauffeurs were well looked after and they had a nice warm room with you know, a sort of a tea urn and a darts board, then they'd want to come back and they'd want to bring customers. So that was quite a canny thing for any owners of these clubs to do, to kind of nurture the loyalty of chauffeurs. I suppose probably the kind of king of all the roadhouses is the Ace of Spades, and it was certainly billed itself as the first one. There were two Ace of Spades, actually. One was on the Great Western Road, which opened in 1926, and then there was this one, which opened in 1927 on the Kingston bypass. Now, again, this one began as a petrol station, a bit of a sort of rickety petrol station and repair shop, but it began to see opportunities start to build on a restaurant, and then eventually a ballroom, and then it built a pool, and the Ace of Spades really sort of, you know, gave the customer everything. Eventually, they had a gymkhana and a polo field, and they even had a field where aircraft could land. So if you were inclined to fly to the Roadhouse rather than drive, then you could do that. I don't know how many people actually did land at the Ace of Spades, but nevertheless, it was a rather wonderful gimmick to set yourself apart from any other rivals. And what's really interesting about the Ace of Spades is you can see from that cartoon there that it had a sort of a mock Tudor exterior. And it was apparently constructed from a local medieval bard, so it used pieces from that to give this old Tudor-Beathan look, which obviously was really popular between the wars. However, once you got inside, it was like stepping through the looking glass, and it was completely different. It was designed by Ernest Brander Musman, and what he did inside was he used black cellulose and chrome and you know, and all these playing card motifs to create something incredibly, you know, sort of au courant. You know, this was just sort of absolutely where it was at, neon signs, and as you can see, the all-important cocktail bar there. So this contrast between the exterior and the interior seems very odd, but it wasn't particularly unusual for roadhouses at the time, particularly those which were older buildings which were having to adapt. But the Ace of Spades on the Kingston bypass is a really brilliant example of this. These photographs come from the Reba archive, who very kindly allow you to put low-res images into a presentation. And I'm just seeing where we are time-wise. Yeah. And so there aren't many pictures really of the interiors of a lot of these roadhouses, but these are very clear and show you how kind of fabulous it looked, but also, yeah, very kind of odd marriage of styles. I think I've got a quote about the Ace of Spades somewhere, actually. Bear with me. Yeah, here we are. Let me read you, just to give you a flavour of the Ace of Spades. This is from the Bystander magazine in 1933. I went down to the Ace of Spades on the Kingston bypass the other evening and found the place crowded. It was a cool evening, but the water was so warm that you could see the steam rising, and several people stayed in the water for at least half an hour. This roadhouse must be coining money. There is not a table to be had at 10 p.m., or again at 12 p.m. or 2 a.m., which are the three most popular times. The fact that there is no license means to say that the guests can arrive American fashion with their own drink, be it champagne, whiskey, brandy, or what have you. The management provide the food, cabaret, 2 dance orchestras and swimming pool, and you do the rest. Up to 9:20 p.m, they can send out for your liquor locally. After that, as I say, you must bring it yourself. So the Ace of Spades was one of a number of roadhouses which didn't have a license, and it didn't actually matter, because they could buy in booze, they could people could bring it themselves. So actually, what it gives these places is a slight sort of frisson of excitement. These are sort of quite transgressive places where you are, drinking when maybe you shouldn't be. In central London, nightclubs during the 1920s are, playing a cat and mouse game with the police, and that they're being raided all the time. This doesn't happen to out of town clubs at all. And certainly, if you are a member, you can go into the lounge and have drinks anyway. So it's, it actually works out very well. And as you can see, the fact it doesn't have a license didn't do it any harm whatsoever. I wanted to show you sort of this advert because first of all, it talks about all the things that are going on, dancing until 3 a.m. and also the amazingly numerous all-night staffs commence their duties at 7 p.m. and therefore maintain the high standard of service at all hours of the night. So you would have staff doing night shift, and you could turn up at any time and get a meal, a drink, whatever. And also this sort of focus on swimming pools, which is really, really important. And I did find this article in the Autocar from 1933, Swimming Pools in Your Health. And on the left there is a nice long list of all the different hotels, clubs and roadhouses which had a swimming pool. And that is the Showboat on the right there, which obviously had one of the best, most state-of-the-art pools. And a lot of them talk about the kind of engineering that goes into these pools, how they're filtered, and the water's very clean. It's very important. And of course, swimming is such a so emblematic part of 1930s leisure. Swimwear advertisements are everywhere. There's the famous label of Janssen with their diving girl on the left there, very famous swimwear manufacturer. And on the right, I really love this particular swimming costume advert with these beautifully decorated bathing costumes. And also, if you want, you can have the Talisman water safe, which is you can put your keys and your powder compact in a little bag, and you can swim with it and it won't get wet. So obviously the Roadhouse, if you're going to Roadhouse, you want to look very fashionable in your swimwear, and there's plenty of places are offering that. In fact, some Roadhouses even had swimwear that you could hire. There was sort of a valeting room where you could hire evening dress or swimwear, or you could change out of your day clothes into your evening wear. I think it was the Ace of Spades had a sort of ladies' powder room where women were on hand to do hair and makeup, so you could kind of spend all day sunbathing and swimming, and then you could look elegant and dressed up for the evening. Perfect. Talking about pools again, I love the sound of the gay adventure in Esher, but here we are, look what it's saying. It's got a river, but its pool is also 70 foot long, it's sterilised, it's warm, it's crystal clear. Bring your drinks for meals at any hour, so that's another Roadhouse which wasn't licensed, but it did have Tony Eldridge's dance band every night. Oh, and I mentioned the Gymkhana, so here we have the Ace of Spades Gymkhana, and there is a slightly fuzzy picture of the Ace of Spades with its airfield in the distance there. So yeah, quite the thing to arrive in your little biplane for cocktails and then take off again. I don't know. So here's good old G.H. Davis in the Illustrated London News again, and he's giving us a wonderful map of London and the outer suburbs and home counties, showing the locations of important country house hotels. Now, yes, some of them are country house hotels, but there's the Ace of Spades. There's the Watermill in Dorking. What else is there? There's a Spider's Web on the Watford bypass. There is the Bell at Beaconsfield. I'm sure there's more. I remember what else is there. I can't see that. I'm sure there's another one as well. But anyway, roadhouses are just as prominent as smart country house hotels. And I love the fact he's done a little drawing of them all. And that is 1932. So really 1932 to 1935, I think, is the apogee of this, this idea of the Roadhouse and the out of town club. And some of them are absolutely enormous. So, and they were called, even at the time, they were called super roadhouses because of the size and the numbers of facilities that were on offer. The Ace of Spades was one. The thatch barn on the Barnet bypass was another one. Here's quite a good picture here, which shows the lawn, the swimming pool, but also the fact that, again, you've got a roadhouse which is built in this very kind of rustic Tudor-Beaton style with almost like a Tudor type gallery there. And it's, as the name suggests, it's got a thatched roof. So this idea that there's always, roadhouses are always designed in this sort of, modern Art Deco style isn't true at all. They really did come in all types of styles. The thatch barn, do you know what? It was the thatch barn which I read actually had somewhere where you could rent evening wear and swimming costumes. I remember that now. But also it was very near to Elstree Studios. So this was somewhere that attracted a lot of film stars, which gave it added glamorous cachet. Another very big super roadhouse is the Spider's Web on the Watford bypass. I can't remember, one of them had parking for 1,000 cars, one of them had parking for 2,000. I can't remember which way round it was now, which one had more car parking space, the Spider's Web or the Thatched Barn. But if there's any proof needed that the car was king in this phenomenon, then these two places are it. There would be more than enough space for everybody, and they just kept expanding as well and always sort of finding new things to offer their customers. This cartoon was given to me by John Law, who wrote a book on roadhouses, which I'll share with you at the end. I don't know where it comes from, but I rather like it because it's obviously got the cocktail menu there and a slightly, suspect-looking lady at the bar with her cocktail and her cigarette holder. But I rather liked it anyway. It sort of conveys the rather racy reputation that roadhouses began to get occasionally. Here are a couple more for you. The Anne Boleyn, which is another example of an old house which adapted to become a modern roadhouse. As you can see, it's near Staines, and there's the cocktail bar on the left. And then there's the Bell at Beaconsfield, which had a really fabulous pool. It calls it here daintiest of roadhouses. There's bathing, lawn tennis, and a fully licensed restaurant. And then there's some really, really kind of quite unusual roadhouses. And we're going a little bit further out of London here because this is the Caveman restaurant, which was completed in 1934 and was opened by Lord Weymouth. So it had these aristocratic connections, which I guess didn't do it any harm. Cheddar Gorge had opened up, I think, in about 1927, and it attracted 250,000 visitors a year. So it was very enterprising of him to open up this restaurant. And he got, it was designed by, well, he was involved in the design, but the architects were Sir Godfrey Jellicoe and Russell Page. And they have created a really spectacular modern building, which actually, I think, fits very snugly into those magnificent natural surroundings. If you look at the picture on the left, which is from Gilbert Rumbold's Wayside book, that the restaurant in the second picture isn't there. That was added about a year later. And apparently, the ceiling of glass had goldfish swimming around overhead. So you could be in the restaurant, look above you, and there would be goldfish. So all these novelties are something that attract more customers. The Chase at Ingerston in Essex, that again is an old hotel which built a very large swimming pool, and its kind of USP was a sunken terrace with windows where you could look at the swimmers underwater while you were having your dinner. Rather good fun. And then this is the beautifully named Laughing Water at Cobham in Kent. And here we have another aristocrat opening this up. This is Lord Darnley, who got Clough Williams Ellis to design this rather spectacular building, which sort of jutted out over the lake. Obviously, Clough Williams Ellis is best known for Portmeirion, but did build a number of kind of pubs and roadhouses as well. And it's another excellent example how a modern building complements its bucolic surroundings. And there on the left from the Sketch magazine is Lord Darnley holding a gondola party in 1937. And you've got some great society beauties there. I think I can see Lady Seafield in the top picture. The beauty in the gondola there in the middle is Lady Marguerite Strickland, who was a real absolute gorgeous woman, often on covers of the magazines in our archive. But one of the reasons Lord Darnley did this, according to, I think it's the Autocar magazine, is the venture is run by the Earl as an alternative to selling his estate to the builders, which is quite interesting. So I don't know if this was a kind of commercial enterprise to help save this part of his estate. And then you've got roadhouses, which are actually quite rustic, and I think they still have a certain appeal. People who visited roadhouses might prefer one or the other, but they might like to sample different types. So this is all part of, kind of the rural rustic idyll, which people could get if they motored out of London. This is the Moat Farm Roadhouse in Wrotham in Kent, and as you can see, it's got a swimming pool there. Hang on, not liking me moving this. There we are. Asker's Roadhouse. What's significant about Asker's Roadhouse is it actually calls itself a roadhouse. I think as the roadhouse fashion spreads out from beyond the home counties, people are less bothered about it being exclusive, and they're quite happy to call themselves a roadhouse. Asker's Roadhouse created lots of promotional material, and actually this kind of brochure cover on the left is something in our archive at Mary Evans, and I found the postcard on the right, I think on eBay some years ago, which obviously shows a car, its headlights as it draws up to Asker's. That was in Dorset, so I don't know whether I already said that. However, if we do want some really wonderful Art Deco architecture, then look no further than Chez Laurie. Chez Laurie was built on the Thanet Way in Kent, and the chap who applied for planning permission for this in 1938 said he wanted to attract a high-class trade, not to cater for charabancs, which is rather fun. So, the people who are establishing these new purpose-built roadhouses are really wanting to position them as an exclusive destination. So Chez Laurie, I think, was remained. I'm not quite sure when it was demolished. Maybe somebody here knows. It's not there anymore. But a really great example of the modern style. But then, look, here we are in Scotland. They've got as far as Scotland. This is the Rob Roy Roadhouse. So at Aberfoyle, some bungalows there, which would provide accommodation overnight. And then there's some real kind of novelty ideas as well. This is the Old Smiddy Roadhouse, which I think is more novelty. This is a far cry from the Showboat in Maidenhead, but nevertheless, it calls itself a roadhouse, and it uses the the horseshoe motif as a bit of a fun thing. And this is what actually roadhouses give themselves quite gimmicky names, like the Ace of Spades and the Spider's Web. They feel like they've come straight out of a detective novel or something, and Old Smithy doesn't particularly, but it's really where they differ from the places which began as inns, historic inns, although some of those did change their names. Now, I wanted to share this as well, just to show the kind of incredible difference in architectural styles. This is KCB Roadhouse in Oxfordshire, which was run by, I can't remember, bear with me, Mrs. Carlton Oakey. And it was opened by Sir Lawrence Chubb of the Scapa Society. And this society was founded to prevent the disfigurement of the environment by uncontrolled advertising. This was quite a thing in the 20s and 30s. People were really, really concerned about the countryside being blighted by advertising hoardings or unplanned developments. So, they really wanted to preserve the traditional look of rural Britain. And so the KCB Roadhouse, now KCB stood for Keep the Countryside Beautiful. And as you can see, it's a very whimsical building, like something out of a Hans Christian Andersen or Brothers Grimm storybook, with its thatched conical roofs, and even the petrol station is, very, very picturesque. When Sir Lawrence Chubb opened it, he declared it the most beautiful petrol filling station in the country. So it's this wasn't somewhere where you went for cocktails and dancing and swimming. This is where you stopped for a cup of tea and some petrol. So these were kind of more rural roadhouses, which are, I suppose, in the same way that we have stopping off points today, somewhere to get some refreshments, fill your car up, and then get on your way. But as you can see, it's a rather unusual building. And I found this image on our website. This is in Eashing in Surrey, and this is another thatched petrol station as well. So obviously the KCB Roadhouse wasn't the only one. And the Roadhouse begins to influence all kind of aspects of life. Even if you weren't the sort of person who would go to a Roadhouse, you would have known about it. Here's a couple of examples I found where fashions for roadhouses are suggested. This advert for Coro on the right there, that black outfit, is called Roadhouse. And on the left is a suggestion for a roadhouse, a frock to wear to a roadhouse party from 1933. Rosa's Lime Cordial chooses to use an illustration of a shapely swimsuited lady at a roadhouse for their adverts, calling it Roadhouse Nights. And then Maison Lyons Chocolate. This is an advert which appeared in a play called Roadhouse, which was written by Walter Hackett and came out in 1934. I've got a programme for it somewhere, and this advert appeared in there. So this is showing all the kinds of amusements which you would enjoy at a roadhouse. There was also, interestingly, an advert for the Ace of Spades in the theatre programme. But then, quite incredibly, in 1933, where every October the Olympia Motor Show took place, but Ford, being Ford, actually had its own exhibition, which ran in tandem, and they held it at the Royal Albert Hall. And in 1933, they decided that they would recreate a roadhouse in the Albert Hall. I would have loved to have seen this, but thankfully there were adverts and a cover of the autocar that maybe give us an idea of what it looked like. Here's the Illustrated London News talking about this. Speed cars always remind me of roadhouses, as I usually find a high proportion of sports singers, MGs, Rovers and Wolseley Hornets parked outside these amusing places. But the best roadhouse I have visited recently was the Royal Albert Hall, transformed by the Ford Motor Company into the representation of a super roadhouse on the occasion of their own Ford Motor Show. Well-known novelty bands played every afternoon and evening, and there were plenty of comfortable chairs to lounge in while refreshing the inner man. A cinema and how working demonstrations of exhibits and a daily competition to win an 8 horsepower Ford saloon car for nothing but a lucky guess. So I thought that was absolutely fabulous. If you want an idea of how far the Roadhouse's influence has extended, look at that exhibition. And here's the play that I mentioned at the Whitehall Theatre in 1934. And what's quite interesting about this is this play begins to, I suppose, hint at the slightly disreputable sort of the reputation that roadhouses were beginning to get. I mentioned the car parks at roadhouses. Now, because they were so extensive, they were sort of well known as places for sexual trysts. You could, if you couldn't get a room somewhere, if you were, not married yet and you wanted somewhere to be together, then a secluded car park was somewhere where you could do that. And that was kind of pretty much sort of a well-known sideline, I suppose, of roadhouses. And roadhouses begin to become the setting of kind of murder mysteries, detective novels. So this idea that, I guess they're quite transgressive destinations anyway, because of the cocktails and the lack of licensing of some of them and the out of hours swimming and dancing. This isn't something that all respectable people might necessarily choose to do. And the plays and books and films begin to come out using the roadhouse as a setting for kind of, tales of, betrayal and murder and crime, which is quite interesting. Now, the Roadhouse, I think I've got a little quote somewhere. Yeah. So the Tatler reviews Roadhouse, and it says that it's got a number of stereotypical habitués of the Roadhouse, nymphomaniacs with titles to suave crooks who roam the balcony with panther tread, which I rather liked. And then Roadhouse gets made into a film a couple of years later. And there you go, and some rather wonderful film sets there showing the pool and people in evening dress sitting at tables. But as you can see from the interior there, it's in an oldie worldy building as well. So again, there's that meeting of modern and old. All right, I'm going to wind up quickly. They're also the subject of cartoons as well. This one on the left is from the Evening News, showing like a nice old-fashioned farmhouse for sale, and then suddenly a massive big placard goes up, site for the new super roadhouse. So a bit of a sort of satire, I suppose, on the fact that rural England is perhaps being blighted by these huge monstrosities. And I absolutely love the one from the humorist here, which is called Traveller's Rest. And the first two little pictures show how in the late 18th or early 19th century, you'd stop at an inn and you would be giving your dinner in a nice sort of tankard of beer, and that would be it. Whereas if you turn up at a roadhouse today, and this one is called the Spider's Parlour, then you are made to dance, to swim, to play golf, to play tennis, ping pong, and basically you're exhausted by the time you go home rather than rested. The sketch ran this wonderful series of cartoons by Frank Reynolds during the 1930s called the Bristlewoods. And the Bristlewoods kind of find themselves in all sorts of social situations. And this is Mr. Bristlewood allows his mind to wander at a roadhouse. So he's quite interested by all the young ladies wandering around in their bathing suits. And here we are. Here's an example of a couple of films from the early 1930s, Roadhouse Murder, The Secluded Roadhouse. And thank you to Pont Life on Blue Sky, who alerted me to this film, which I didn't know about, actually, 1934, Something Always Happens, where a real pivotal plot of the film is all about investing in roadhouses. So absolutely at the high point of the roadhouse popularity, it becomes, a theme of a film at the time. There's a couple of stills from that showing, two of the characters assessing a map about where they can pinpoint their building. And here, I think I used the term racy roadhouse earlier, and there's an actual song from a radio show called Racy Roadhouse. And also you might have sort of kind of Pulp Fiction type stories. This is from the famous Sexton Blake library, and this is later, actually. This is early 1950s, but Roadhouse Girl, she walked in on murder. So Roadhouse has suddenly become very much associated with this kind of thing. Edgar Wallace, kind of one of the best-selling authors of this period, and he wrote The Coat of Arms. And as you can see, this is a sort of a detective novel, crime novel, set at a roadhouse. You've also got that lady there is Monica Ewer, who wrote a book literally called Roadhouse in 1933, a novel about a roadhouse, which gives a great insight into how roadhouses operated, what you would find there. And Graham Greene, who wasn't so well known at the time, but certainly a much more sort of sophisticated writer, includes roadhouses in two of his novels. Roadhouse features in Brighton Rock, but also in The Confidential Agent, he gives a great description of the Tudor Club Roadhouse, which I'll read to you here. It was an old Tudor house. He could tell it was genuine Tudor. It was full of armchairs and sofas and a cocktail bar where you expected a library. The lavatory was certainly not Tudor. It was all glass and black marble. So very much shades of the Ace of Spades there, I think. So what happened to the roadhouses? Well, there were a number of things, really. First of all, as more and more people began to get cars, some of them were victims of their own success, basically, and they would be inundated with, I suppose, a more de classe customer. So the real social elite began to move on when certain roadhouses were considered no longer exclusive. In fact, Graham Greene in The Confidential Agent says this. He talks about another roadhouse. He says, "You've heard of the Spanish Galleon?" "No, I don't. So it was my first roadhouse near Maidenhead, but I had to sell out in the end. The West, it's losing caste a bit. Kent's better, even Essex. On the West, you get a rather popular element on the way to the Cotswolds." So that, I suppose, is a real example of the snobbery that you're getting, that really roadhouses are becoming ubiquitous and much more popular, and therefore they're not as exciting, they're not as exclusive. So that's one reason. The other reason is they're incredibly expensive to run. West End bands, swimming pools, none of that is cheap. And so some of them, which open, with very optimistically, with great ambitions, close within a couple of years. They simply can't sustain the business. And then really the death knell comes with the Second World War. And petrol rationing, of course, it means nobody can use their cars, nobody can get to the roadhouses. So a journalist in the Autocar in 1940 talks about this major issue, which leads to the closure of a lot of roadhouses if they had survived the 1930s. And he says, "Petrol rationing appears to have struck all roadhouses very badly. All over the country, these pre-war restaurants would have been sparkling with bright young things and bright new cars, but nowadays they seem sadly neglected. One day last week, I stopped for tea at one of the most famous of these roadhouses near London. The place looked deserted. However, I sat down at one of the tables for several minutes. Then I got impatient and rang the bell. Still nothing happened. I wandered around the place, poking my head around all sorts of doors, until, coming across the car park from an outhouse, was a waiter struggling into his white coat. He informed me I was the second customer that week." So, not good news for the Roadhouse, I'm afraid. This photograph here that I'm showing is the Showboat in the 1940s, when it became an all services club temporarily, and then it became a factory. I think it was manufacturing rivets or something like that. And then after that, it never really regained its place as that sort of shining bright example of a very modern roadhouse. It was briefly a discotheque in the 1980s, but what eventually happened to it was this, and it became known as, ironically, Exclusive House. And I think you will all know that if an Art Deco building isn't properly maintained, it will begin to look very sad very quickly. And the Showboat certainly did. And in 2019, it was demolished. And that was the end of that, which is really very sad. But there are some happy stories about roadhouses, and one particularly miraculous survivor is this building. If any of you drive up the A1, and I do quite a bit because I'm from County Durham originally, so I go up and see family. I was always intrigued by this building, which is between sort of Peterborough and Stamford. And for quite a few years, it was a little chef. In my time, this is. And then I know for a number of years, probably at least a decade, it was derelict and looked an absolute eyesore. Well, it actually first opened in 1932 as the Wansford Knight, Knight, and it was a number of roadhouses in the Midlands called the Knights of the Road, which, you know, they weren't super roadhouses. They weren't offering pools and jazz bands and cocktails, but they were very smart inside, you know, really very smart Art Deco buildings. It then became the New Mermaid Inn, before it became a little chef, which retained its sort of more or less the building. Anyway, after its dereliction, very thankfully, Harris McCormick Architects took the building over, restored it, and called it Ark House in tribute to Bauhaus, which obviously you can see the link there. And so now if you're driving up the A1, you will see it looking, you know, very proud and very like what it would have looked like back in 1932. And if you go on the Harris McCormick website, there's a really nice film about it. And also, if you want to know more about some of these clubs, then some of you may very well have seen these already. If you haven't, do go on British Pathé and check out their 4 different newsreels on Outer London's clubs and cabarets, which includes the Bell at Beaconsfield, the Hungaria, the Showboat, and the Ace of Spades. So, you know, you're actually seeing film footage of these places, people splashing around in the pools, the cabaret acts, and the dancing. Really rather wonderful. I couldn't share them here because I think they charge about £100 each, and couldn't afford to, but do go and have a look. And I mentioned earlier John Law and David Gutzker. I thought this would be a great idea for a book, and then I discovered somebody had already done it, and it was David Gutzker and Michael John Law who wrote this book, The Roadhouse Comes to Britain. And I wrote an article about this which is on the Art Deco Society website. And I didn't read their book very much because I didn't want it to influence what I was going to write. And I've been reading it more with this talk coming up. And it's really great, actually. It's published by Bloomsbury Academic, but it's very, very accessible, really interesting. And thankfully, what they've written, it pretty much sort of dovetails with what I'd written as well, but obviously in much more detail, really thoroughly researched. And it's a great read. So if you're interested, I would get hold of that book. And then a little bit of self-promotion here. I touch on roadhouses in my chapter on Britain in my Holidays and High Society book. But if you like anything to do with travel and leisure during that interwar period, I cover the French Riviera, Biarritz, Deauville, the Venice Lido, Samoritz, that kind of thing. So, and it's lavishly illustrated with lots of lovely images from Mary Evans Picture Library. On the subject of which, if you don't know about us, do check out our website. If you're a writer or anyone who ever needs to use a picture, do get in touch with me via that website. Or if you are interested in getting in touch with me for anything else, then there are my contact details. I'm not quite sure why I've put oh no, I haven't. That's my website, which is woefully not really finished, but I put it there anyway. You can also follow me on X. I've kind of migrated from X to Blue Sky recently, like millions of others, but I'm still sort of on X. And if you want to, if you've enjoyed this talk, do give me a shout out on there. If you haven't, just stay quiet. But thank you for listening. I can't see any of you. I hope you're all still there, and I hope you enjoyed it. And that just leaves me to say thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That was brilliant. Really, really enjoyed that. We've got lots of questions, so I'm going to crack on with those. But I just wanted to thank you for all the beautiful slides. There was so much to feast our eyes on there. It really helps great.
Bring it to life, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, got a couple of questions about chauffeurs. James and also Helen have asked about them. James asked, would many of the clientele have had chauffeurs, and where would they have refreshed themselves? I think you did touch on that.
Maybe that question came in before that, but yes, because certainly when these really exclusive ones in Maidenhead, Hotel de Paris, in Bray, etc., these were very, very special, exclusive places. So, I mean, certainly, it was aristocrats inevitably and upper classes who originally adopted, the sort of the motoring craze because they could afford to. So lots of them would have driven themselves, but plenty of them, especially society women, would have had chauffeurs, definitely.
Okay.
And as I said, it was quite important to provide facilities for chauffeurs because it meant they would bring, they would tell their employers about where to go. So it was worth doing.
Okay, so that brings us on to Helen's questions. She said, were the chauffeurs freelancers who advertised trips, or would they be employed?
That I don't know, but you know what? I mentioned Godfrey Davis, the car hire, and I wonder if they offered chauffeurs, in which case that would be a case of getting in a car and them saying, "Where would you like to go, madam? I can recommend the Showboat at Maidenhead." I'm guessing that actually, but I wouldn't be surprised that they would offer that. I think most people, most wealthy families would have their own chauffeur, definitely. But they would, they'd talk with other chauffeurs, and they would talk with other chauffeurs at these places. So again, they would go, "Oh well, why don't you try taking them to the Hungaria?" And they might suggest it. So yeah, I'm guessing that a little bit, but that would be my assumption.
Okay, thank you. Lucy, another Lucy says, did the idea of roadhouses reach further outside London? I know you've touched on Birmingham, you touched on Scotland.
Yeah, there were quite a few. I mean, I was quite because I'm from County Durham. There was a big super roadhouse at Pitty in Durham. There was the Maybury Roadhouse in Edinburgh. I couldn't find a picture of that to show you, but that's a really an Art Deco style building, which is worth looking at. Yeah, they did. I suppose there was only so much time to cover all of them. To concentrate on the London ones, which were kind of the forebears of everything else that came, and they were certainly the most glamorous and interesting.
Yeah, and based around the Thames.
Yeah. And then into Kent and Essex as well.
And Lucy also asked, oh no, she says they're very different to pubs, roadhouses, which I hadn't realised. What class of person made up the clientele? Were they expensive?
They were probably, they would have been expensive to working class people in terms of membership or entrance fees, but I think they represented good value for people who had a little bit of money in their pocket. The whole point of them was because they wanted car drivers to come, then it was only really people who could afford cars who could go to them. So it was a sort of self-fulfilling thing that they only attracted upper class or upper middle class people at first, until cars became more affordable and more people began to get cars, and then more people could get to these roadhouses. And then
more
that's the point where kind of suddenly roadhouses weren't as fashionable anymore, because the smart set, the enjoyment brigade, as they were sometimes called, had moved. They didn't want to go. And things like swimming pools, if you were Lord whoever, you didn't want to go to your local swimming pool. You wanted to go to a swimming pool where you weren't going to be rubbing shoulders with the hoi polloi, the gamekeeper.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's certainly, there are definite stories about class to be told with roadhouses, but as the decade went on, I think it did shift a bit. Yeah.
Okay. And Lucy also said, great talk. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Geraldine says, how many of these wonderful buildings survive, or indeed their interiors?
Well, I told you I didn't want this question.
Yeah, we're not really sure, are we?
Do not know the answer.
Something to investigate.
I mean, the Ace of Spades gone, burned down. And I think that part of the Kingston bypass is known as a traffic black spot. But some of them, I mean, certainly the older places, like Great Foster's is obviously still there. My friend looked at it recently. Wedding venue. I don't think there will be many interiors that are left. It's something that I think would be really great for the Art Deco Society to perhaps do a little project. And David Gutzker's and John Law's book makes great lists of all these different roadhouses, from super roadhouses, these really big famous ones, down to rural ones as well. So you kind of work through that list, see what's there, see whether it's still there, what exists on that site. Yeah, I mean, which is photographs, those Reba photographs of the interior of the Ace of Spades are kind of precious, really, to be able to see that.
Absolutely. Okay, Lorna asks, did people tend to stay overnight or for a weekend, or was it more likely people came for an evening and then drove home again?
Came for an evening and drove home. Now, what I haven't really been able to ascertain is what happened about drink driving. Probably not very much. Either, people probably did it. Some places did have rooms, but most of the time they would, also, the ones that were open round the clock, you'd stay for breakfast and then, maybe sober up a bit and then drive home. Lots of these people initially didn't really have jobs to go to, didn't have to worry about that kind of thing. Yeah, some did have rooms, but no, it wasn't the same as a hotel in that respect.
Oh, okay. James says, thanks for the Pont Life mention. Helen says, interesting to see the history of Asker's. I remember it as a cafe, and now even that's closed.
Ah, is the building still there then? I wonder. Well,
I'm not sure. She doesn't say.
Yeah.
It sounds like we've got lots to investigate about roadhouses.
Yeah.
And Lorna says the Maybury is still there. It's a casino now, and the interior is still in almost completely original condition. It's fabulous.
Right, that's great.
That's great to know. Yeah. And then Emily says, I've done quite a bit of research on the later history of roadhouses, and none of them do survive, sadly. So Helen's come back and said the building's gone. So that was Asker's.
Oh, so Asker's is.
Yeah. So, okay.
It's really sad.
Okay, Emily is rescinding her comment in the light of the Maybury, but I think obviously it's true that not many do survive.
The majority have gone in one way or another, definitely, or have been changed beyond recognition.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Ark House on the A1 is such an interesting project. It'd be lovely if it was still a roadhouse, but I think at least it's been preserved and the spirit of the building remains.
Yeah, that's something, isn't it? Jenny earlier on sort of asked about the reasons for the demise of the roadhouse, but then she came back and said, thank you, you've covered that, so thank you very much. And I think that is it. Gosh, we've had loads of questions. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I could answer most of them as well, which is great. It's always really
I think it's brilliant. I mean, the knowledge that you've been able to share and the talk has been absolutely fantastic, Lucy. Thank you so much.
I always write down loads of notes and then don't use them. So I hope it makes sense. I tell you one thing I forgot to say, because it's actually a great story, and it is in my article, but roadhouses were often cited as the settings for adultery. Because in divorce cases, if a couple wanted to get divorced, there would have to be, the man would have to go and be sort of caught. Somebody else. So I did have this little quote, which if I can just, I wrote it down. In January 1938, Mrs. Effie Smallwood McCausland petitioned for dissolution of her marriage on the basis that her husband Thomas had committed adultery at the Bubbling Brook Roadhouse near Reading. I mean, that sounds like something out of a Pulp Fiction novel, doesn't it? And then the most high-profile divorce case is Mr. Ernest Simpson and his wife Wallis. She accused Ernest of committing adultery with Mrs. E.H. Kennedy at the Hotel de Paris in July 1936.
Gracious.
Waiters and a porter from the club were called to the witness stand to give evidence. Wow. Of course, it was at the Hotel de Paris, which is one of the most exclusive places. But interesting. So that that again all added to the Roadhouse's notoriety.
Just had one more comment. Duncan says, thanks for an interesting evening. So thank you for saying that, Duncan. I think we've all found it super, super interesting. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you.
Okay, so as usual, if anyone would like to rewatch tonight's webinar, you'll all be sent a link in a day or so to Vimeo, where you can watch it on demand. Please don't forget to fill in and return your feedback form. That's our new thing, and then we will choose one at random to win a free ticket for it will be the January talk, not the December talk, for reasons I'll go into in a moment. And the feedback forms are going to go out this evening, so please watch out for those. We'd love to have your comments and act on any suggestions that you might like to make. We hope you'll join us for our Christmas talk on the 17th of December at 7 o'clock, when Emma Baston will be taking a light-hearted look at Christmas in the 20s and 30s, and also exploring how Art Deco style has been used for Christmas over the years.
Oh, I follow her on social media. I'll have to join.
Yeah. Actually, Emma's the treasurer of Art Deco Society. She's our treasurer here, and she's previously given a talk on Art Deco fabrics for us. And also Kate Garner, as our ambassador, will be recording a song specially for this event. And I need to point out that this talk for December will be absolutely free of charge for everybody. It's sort of like a little Christmas gift. So that's added incentive for you to join us for that. And it's called A Very Merry Art Deco Christmas on the 17th of December. So thank you all again. Thank you once again, Lucinda, Lucy. And that has been so fascinating. Thank you. We really appreciate your talk this evening. And good night, everybody. See you in December.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.